assumptions because the answer is because this is what we want to test, to check, to study the paper. If you're proposing other choices, there might be another way, but there might be another paper. And this is our paper, we want to study this. Okay? The assumptions model the reality, but the closest, our attempt to make it as close as possible to reality will introduce so much complexity in the model. The end it will be impossible to study.
I would like to ask everyone to keep their microphones muted during the presentation, just so we reduce the possibility of noise. Thanks.
So to the audience, does it, can you see the presentation properly?
Yes.
Do you see that correctly? Okay.
Yes, everything looks good.
If I go front, back, yeah, okay. So whenever the moderator wants or says.
Moderator says go, and we're ready whenever you are.
Okay, we're ready then. So I shall start then with the talk called Chemical Organization Theory and Music. So I will explain today very general ideas, starting ideas of how to relate this chemical organization theory, which is a framework for understanding reaction networks in general. So dynamical properties of reaction networks, something that sounds very far from art in principle. So, and make a relation from this to music. This sounds a little crazy, but you will see at the end of the talk, hopefully, that this is actually something interesting. That's the main goal of this talk, not to teach precisely how to do this, but to understand the interesting relations that one can find. And then this is not a crazy question or area at all. So I'm Tomas Veloz, for those who don't know me, and I'm actually really happy to know that there are so many people attending to this talk. Many of you, we don't know each other, so this is good. That's why I kind of expected something as nice as this, because I know CLEA, it's a great place. So I will start with the acknowledgements, because probably you get here because you know, or you have been related to CLEA or to the art science group, which is a subset of CLEA that has been founded around 1 or 2 years ago, after a long history of interdisciplinary attempts to relate art and science. So now these things, thanks to Katarina, Francis, and the other guys in the team, which I'm not mentioning everyone. I'm sorry if your name is not there, but the point is that there is a group of people that are trying to foster serious research, and not just research, creation in general, combining art and science. So we will talk a little bit about this because it's an important motivation of what we do. Also, I want to acknowledge the Templeton Foundation and the Templeton grant we got, which has a number and so on. But the title is The Origins of Goal-directedness, a formal scenario based on chemical organization theory and cybernetics. So this is a long name. And in very short, what we are trying to do here is to understand a very old problem of how goal emerges out of a reality where physics and science in general doesn't tell us about the reasons why there are goals. Why it's not, maybe is it all about minimizing energy or maximizing entropy? So because our goals don't look like we are maximizing entropy as physics says. So we have some other sorts of other kind of complex goals which might in a very evolutionary, like cosmological evolutionary perspective, end up corresponding to some very fundamental physical principle, but we don't live it like that. And we don't see that happening all the time in nature. We see the purposeness, we see individuation. So we see agents having purposes, which are not directly or like easily they don't seem like directed by some fundamental physical laws, but by something more of a more cognitive nature, or maybe social or cultural. So how can we explain that out of this, maybe let's say physical cold realm, cold or maybe dark or gray realm, something colorful like creativity, diversity, ecology, all that happens, all that it's created. So how can we do that? And then cybernetics is a field of research that takes care of some of the aspects that are fundamental for that. And chemical organization theory is basically a mathematical language to describe that. So in the following this very crazy question, very fundamental question of how purpose emerges, how goals are formed, is that we thought that we have goals seen appearing in nature, but also in the arts. So why not, like after Francis sent an email a few weeks ago, some people, Christian Gendraco, Stan Wunderbolt, Catarina, Vincenzo de Florio, Felix Lasso, and some others who I couldn't find pictures of, gather in an email group setting and say, well, sounds interesting. Maybe we should start discussing more about it. And we created this seminar, which is going to be a cycle of seminars. This is the first one. And the seminar organization team, which I'm also thanking for, is our Natalie, Katarina, and Giz. So this is the basics, how these kind of things happen. You need to have some context going on. You need to have some funding going on. You need to have interesting people and people that want to organize stuff. So thank you to all of them first, because this was a kind of quick move, and we expect to burst a flame that keeps moving. Okay, so because I also know that some people don't know me, I will briefly introduce myself. I come from a very kind of mathematical, formal background, physics, math, computer science, and then a PhD in interdisciplinary studies, where I sort of put all this formal stuff together, studying cognitive science. And lately, well, for the last 10 years, I will say I have been studying as well chemical reaction networks, which using them as a paradigm to model, to represent situations in general. So it's very interesting, because when you think of reality as if it will be of chemical nature, everything is transformation. Everything is about things becoming other things. And this is sort of the philosophy that is going to be behind this talk too. And my relation to music is quite amateur. I play the guitar, trumpet, and I've been performing with my very good friend, Michelle Barros, who has also worked for CLEA for organizing conferences as well. We have performed in conferences. So we have in the past for quite some years already, let's say, digesting some scientific concepts and relating them to science. So it's very good for me personally that this is happening, that we are able to put serious questions and gather people with knowledge around these ideas. So musicians and scientists, we should discuss. Okay, now I go for the motivation of the talk, which is the interdisciplinarity. The Center Leo Apostel is an interdisciplinary research center. I also direct the Interdisciplinary Research Center in Chile. And for those who don't know about interdiscipline in general, it's basically thinking beyond the boundaries of domains of knowledge. So it's opening up the possibility for different areas to exchange information, because certain phenomena or certain whatever things we want to know more about the world, or problems that we need to solve, they cannot be tackled by approaching them from a single perspective. One of the very simplest example and the most popular now, is the environmental crisis. So this is not about climate only. So we don't need climate scientists only to study this. We need to go to economics, to public policies, to the agricultural studies, to engineering. So everything, almost every area that you can think of has an impact on why we have a climate crisis. So the problem cannot be tackled from a single perspective. You need to gather people who have studied, become experts in different things, to discuss, create a common perspective, understand the tensions between the different perspectives, and come up with solutions. So that's very briefly the interdisciplinary approach to problem solving for the example of climate crisis. But in general, this is now a sort of paradigm for doing research, for work in general. And I personally believe that this is perhaps one of the major new ways in which humans will start relating, and will create new forms of maybe democracy or social organizations and so on. So it goes, and in the depth of this, it's the possibility to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So I'm a mathematician, let's say, and I need to talk to a biologist. So I cannot expect the biologist to think like me, because the biologist has a different formation, and the biologist cannot expect me to think as he thinks or she thinks. So we need to open our minds first to understand how other person might think. So it's an empathy principle here. But okay, but that's for another talk. It's just to introduce, motivate interdisciplinary. One of the interesting parts of interdiscipline, one of the maybe sub areas, one of the continents of interdiscipline, it's relating something very big areas, art and science. So there are many pictures of this, but basically the idea of art science is to mix the formal, the very structured way of thinking with of science, with the other very open, free, and brave way of thinking of the arts. So when you put these things together, something wonderful should happen. And this is pretty much a very simple summary of art science. There are lots of works about art science, but interestingly, there is no Wikipedia entry about art science. There is only a Wikipedia entry about the Art Science Museum somewhere in Asia. I cannot remember where, but there is a museum, and that has an entry. So Katarina and Francis wrote a paper defining this or introducing this concept, but this is something new. I will mention by the end that there are some attempts around this art science stuff. Most of them are quite new. So this is an emerging field. We are not talking about something that is well settled and solved, and there is no even Wikipedia entry for it. So we need to be kind of open thinkers at this moment, historically speaking. But I want to mention this event, Einstein meets Magritte, which was held at CLEA. Well, Francis, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, somewhere around that, 1995, 1997. CLEA, when it was when just born, they organized this huge event called Einstein meets Magritte. Magritte, famous painter from Belgium, and Einstein, the famous scientist. And the idea of this meeting was to put together scientists and artists and everyone, like more than just arts and science. There were also political science and philosophers and so on. We have done other events in this respect. Actually, I didn't mention, but I organized a series of conferences for the last years about this, but I don't mention that on this talk. So CLEA, it's a place where this is happening. That's pretty much what I want to say. And the final motivation, which puts us like for real around the area, is the notion of creation, something which is common in science and in the arts. We are all creators. We are creative people. That's something that is kind of in the intersection of science and art. It is creativity for sure. So the idea is in art science clearly is to cross feed. So I can learn from the artistic way of thinking, and the artist can learn from the scientific way of thinking. I say I as a scientist because I'm 99% scientist and 1% artist. Anyways, so this is the motivation, and we go now a little bit to the topic. Yes, Katarina?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. We were wondering that we see the overview of your entire presentation. So you will begin the presentation now and you can make it a full screen.
So you still see the...
We didn't
You still see the first slide?
We see the overview of your entire presentation. So the list on the left side, the main, and the right side.
The list. So you see the other screen. So if I share this,
I hope you didn't go through the...
Oh.
Now we see it.
Now you see everything.
Yes.
You were just seeing the first one?
Yes.
This.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, here I will repeat like the paper, now the group of people, then the seminar organization team, introduce myself, now interesting, interdisciplinarity, art science, and creation. Now we continue. Thanks, Katarina, for letting me know. I wasn't aware of that. I'm sorry. But that's not, now we come to the meat. So the other was just motivation. So for music, it's the cultural phenomenon and quite mysterious. There are many things to say about music, and I'm not an expert musician, so please forgive me, those musicians or those who practice music, for maybe not fulfilling your expectations about speaking about music. I will just say that this is something that can happen in the top of the mountain by a group of women from some maybe Eastern European culture, or in the streets of whatever random town in Latin America. The first can be ritualistic, the second can be folkish, or maybe they can even be asking for money for the music they do, like busking. So it can have so many forms. It's impossible to summarize what music is for humanity in a few slides, at least for me. I would like to mention though some important features that is a fundamental aspect in every known culture. So all cultures have it. So it's something that emerges naturally from humans. It's also evolutionary because it has changed over centuries, over generations. In all cultures you observe, you will see there is music and that the music evolves. So when it goes to a new territory, a new place, it's mixed up with the music of the other guys, and there are lots of musical forms or musical styles, or yeah, lots of music that is created by the interaction between different cultures. And there is a sort of intuitive beauty in it. So this is something that we don't need to be said what it's beautiful or not. We can intuitively understand that or get that, which is also cultural. This is famous Yo-Yo Ma, and that's like an African tribe or something like ritualistic that I wanted to show. The difference, the interesting difference here is that we here have a string instrument. So this is music coming out of melodic music, and this is percussion. So it's more rhythmic music. There is rhythm, there is melody, there is harmony, voices, and so on. So there is a lot to say about it. And one like very interesting aspect about it is that music is not representational in principle. So we got Vivaldi, Four Seasons, right? And the winter, you close your eyes and you can hear the winter if you get inspired enough by the music. But in principle, music does not represent anything about reality. It's not like, not all music can be translated into something that you can see. Visual arts is a little different because one tends, like cognitively, to associate something that exists in our physical reality to what we see. For music, the forms that we sort of perceive are not the forms necessarily that we see in nature all the time. So the music represents some abstract forms, something abstract about it. I'm not, of course, what I'm saying is very open and basic. There are millions of books about it, and big thinkers have said things about this, but the talk is not about that. So I'm not gonna elaborate on that. Something else that can be said is that music is deeply connected to physics and mathematics. For physics, we got the acoustics. It's the basic connection between music and physics. So acoustics explains what are musical, what is sound, more than music, what is sound. And also Pythagoras in mathematics and many other thinkers, Bach or different, let's say, composers, and lots of people across history have established interesting relations that come from the patterns of sounds and how the patterns of sounds become music. So that has led to the creation of music theory, music theories. There are lots of music theories. I'm also not an expert on that, but I have get some assistance from my girlfriend, who is a musician, and also from my friend Michelle, who is the person I played with in the past. So there is something called tonal music theory, and they have taught me some stuff. Maybe some of you are experts. But to start, I will just introduce some basic concepts. The pitch and duration. So that can, with pitch and duration, you can already show melodies or music in general. And that's what music scores do. So here you know that the first note has the half of the duration of the second, and then the third has, again, the same duration of the first, and the other, because it has a little point, it's in between the two, the first and the second, and so on. So there is a way, and for those who read music, you will find that this tan 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 tan. You can read and you will identify a known melody. And these letters you see here, they indicate what should be the sound behind this melody, so everything sounds nice. So it's a harmonization of the melody. But of course, too many concepts to introduce. But one important thing is to talk about intervals in music, because they explain or they entail the sense of this sounds good, or this sounds rare, this doesn't sound good. There are actually lots of definitions about this. I will just mention two. Perfect intervals, which are the unison interval, the octave, and the perfect fifth. And if you hear them, naturally, mentally, we think it's all okay. it can remain sounding like that. There is a sense of motion here, which is very abstract. When perfect intervals and harmonic intervals, you can feel that you can keep hearing that with no problem. It actually gets boring after a while. It's too perfect, it's too simple. And there are dissonant intervals, where you feel the minor second, the major seventh, and so on, where you feel something tells you this must change, this must go somewhere. There is a lot of motion encoded in these musical intervals. And music theories create their own concepts to speak about this, and they make sort of, without knowing or without wanting, I'm not an expert enough to say if it's want or no, but there is a sort of physics behind it. So there is a sort of physical realm where the objects are musical notes and there are forces, and you can think in terms of those analogies. We will do something very similar, but using chemistry today. Going further, we have chords, harmony, and that evokes emotions. So there is a much deeper sense of connection between music and our emotions and what we feel, because certain harmonies, certain chords, certain ways of composing music, certain rhythms evoke different emotions. And this has been studied for centuries. So there are, of course, there is a neuroscience of music, and there are lots of things that could be called music and science and art science of music, let's say. But we will not dig into that as well. It's not the topic, but that's something related. So in tonal music theory, you can learn how to evoke emotions following certain patterns, certain structures, certain intervals, or ways of harmonize melody, or certain melodies in general. And that, of course, comes from the scales, the patterns, and composition. So here you can see a pattern that is repeated in another scale, and you see, okay, these are two scales, but they have in common certain part of it. So they are not the same, but they have a part in common. So they are related somehow. You can put some notes of this scale in this, which is G, and then you will be playing at the same time, kind of, it will be a consonant or okay if you change to the C scale. So there are connections, lots of connections. And these connections are revealed by the musical patterns that can be analyzed in scales and in other more complex structures, which I don't really master. And you can go even further, defining changes of chords. So most of traditional music, blues and folk music, and have some particular structures where you go from one chord, you change always to the fifth chord, which you can discover by following this. Okay, what's the fifth of this? And then from the fifth, you go to the fourth, and then to the second. And there are certain rules that if you follow them, you will be doing cool music. You will be doing nice music. Blues is a structure. Well, traditional music in general has certain very fixed structures that all musicians, all composers follow. So there is so much freedom, there are so many possibilities you can follow, that music never ends, even though the rules can be very simple. You can count how many blues records have been recorded in history, and the structure of blues can be more simple. It's more simple than that will be like completely boring. So it's because there are these progressions, these harmonic rules, these patterns that people have discovered studying and created tonal music theory, that music can keep forever being composed, and that's the trick. So we now have a theory about music, which I have to say there are, as I mentioned before, there are many others, and this corresponds mostly to what Western people believe it's music. If you go to other cultures like Indian culture or so, or others, they have other structures. So that's also something relevant and beautiful to say, is that we have a sort of universe. The rules of beauty are cultural dependent. So it's maybe not entirely, well, These are cross-cultural approaches to think about this, which we will not, of course, follow today as well, but it's important to grasp this notion to continue. Okay, so we have music. We go to tonal music, which give us a theory, and then we got generative music, which is, okay, if we know that musical forms are patterns of information, actually, when we learn music, the first thing we learn is the very simple patterns. Okay, your fingers must go here, and then repeat this finger structure here to the other side, so you can learn how to play chords or how to play in the piano. It's all about little patterns of information, where information is what our hands or voice or whatever instrument we play do, like drums. So musical forms, I know musical form is something complex for music researchers, for music experts, but I'm just saying musical forms in a very general way, like the form of music, just as simple as that. And you can think of that as a pattern of information. When you do that, you become kind of like scientist about it, okay? Music is not anymore something really mysterious, and now music is simply a pattern of information, which is encoding actually the pattern of how how particles of air vibrate. So there is a strict connection between physics, information, and music, and I think it's hard to deny that. And now we know from almost a century from now to now that computers can implement algorithms to process information. We know that information is all representable, can be represented by zeros and ones, only 0 and 1. You have the Turing machine, basically, which is the formalism to explain that all information can be encoded that way, and that can be processed in a universal form, which means that, well, there is a theory of computation to talk about that. Then you have programming languages. So you can take this information and operate it in the way you want. Programming languages allow you to have a lot of freedom to process information. What is an algorithm? It's a procedure that starts at some point and ends somewhere else after the process is done. So this is the way the bits are changed. This bit is 1, or flip it to 0, the 0 flip it to 1, move it to the other side, and this change of information is expressed by an algorithm, which ends up bringing up to date extremely complex products like Google. What Google does in general is information retrieval, is taking the information of all the web and connecting it to what you type in the search. Amazon, which is algorithms to purchase and deliver products and so on. And Spotify, more related to music, which is a system that streams music and calculates statistics and does so many more things, recommends music and so on. There are lots of tasks performed by these algorithms, which are, there are no more than just extremely big and complex algorithms. So it's all information processing. Now the question is, can algorithms generate music? That's kind of what the question of generative music. And we have very old attempts. This is from 1980 something, like first softwares to write music. And then there are, you can implement algorithms that start from a certain pattern and generate musical forms. This is actually an analysis of the voices of different singers for a song in the Beatles. And then you can use those patterns to create you make music like the music of the Beatles. And that is done by certain programs, softwares, where you can incorporate some basic rules or some basic, let's say, starting points, musical starting points, and then the algorithm does the rest. I will not dig much into that because we have an expert coming in a few weeks to tell us more about this. I'm just explaining what generative music is. And then now we make the connection to chemistry, because chemistry is the generative paradigm of nature. So chemistry is the fundamental basis at which nature is generated. So we have physics. Physics give us the simple laws, But all what happens in nature is much more chemical. Of course, it's physically driven, but the processes are mostly of chemical nature. Geochemistry is pretty much what explains why are we here. Like geochemistry explain after the Big Bang and so on, planets are formed, and then it's all about geochemical processes until life emerges somehow. So chemistry has this capacity to, I will explain here, because to generate nature, basically. So atoms have structure which defines their affinity or their bonding properties, so they can join to other atoms, right? That process generates fundamental matter spatial structures. So that's how crystals are formed, for example, in this case. Another, like the matter takes form because of chemistry in many cases, because physics as well, but it's a physico-chemistry processes. Molecules can break apart or join to other atoms or molecules. So that's when the game begins. So we got types of chemical reactions. We have combination, decomposition, replacement, double replacement, combustion, and many others. And these are just very simple structures that you take atoms and you create molecules. You take a molecule and break it up into atoms, or you take two molecules and combine them into two new other molecules and stuff. All that is what chemistry does at a very fundamental level. And those chemical processes involving complex molecules end up giving rise to the substrate of life. So life emerges out of this very simple composition, combination, decomposition, chemical reactions. So that's the funny thing. And then all nature comes out of just fundamental chemical reactions that do not aim at being life. You know, it's very striking to see, okay, chemistry is something so dark and simple and local. Chemical reactions are local, they occur and they don't know that they are forming a big structure and they are becoming a cell. So but there is some advance, some way to know that how that happens, and that's known as chemical pathways. So reactions can happen in sequences, and these sequences tend to create more complex structures, complex enough that life can happen. Someone is scratching the screen. I'm not just saying for that person to take care. Then the question is how life emerged out of a geochemical soup. That's the chemistry of life. How do we get the chemistry of life? How does cell reproduction and so on come to life, come to happen? There are many self-like concepts to explain this. So cells have to somehow self-assemble for the first time, so the cells can work. Virus, it's a very simple structure that can live inside a cell. Bacteria are some other very simple structures, and it seems to be that these very basic forms started to come together somehow, forming finally what the cell with a nucleus, the eukaryote cell is. And these cells have to have the capacity to self-maintain, to self-reproduce in the beginning, and then we got processes of mixing. So cells mix with other cells and so on, and we create the complexity of life. But there are lots of self-like properties. That's the interesting thing. Actually, here we got the research of one colleague, Harold Fellerman, from the A-Life community, who has tried to explain very fundamental ways by which these self-assembling principles could have happened for the first time. So there is a field of research called artificial life. One of their aims is to understand how life emerged from the first time out of this chemical soup. And there are some other well-known patterns of reactions called reaction pathways, like this, which is the Krebs cycle, that explain the inner workings of life. So some people have tried to understand the first patterns, structures, spatial patterns, and some others have tried to understand the first chemical pathways that give rise to energy and life in general. And up to now, because of genome research and biochemistry, the advanced techniques, there are something known as reaction network databases, where all the reactions, biochemical reactions that occur in living systems can be mapped, can be organized. So some molecules participate in the life processes of many living entities, and some others only in particular living systems. Some operate through certain pathways, some others operate through other pathways, and then you can put all that together and you get like the orchestra of life, as we shall see hopefully by the end of this talk. So this is like the huge orchestra of life, where all chemistry is just left there. And the point is that if we have all these patterns, all these reaction networks, what is this fundamental self-creation structure that separates what is just a geochemical soup from what is life? We have seen that there are need of some structure, some metabolic processes, but is there some structural footprint that separates what is life from what is not life? And that's the concept of autopoiesis, one of the possible answers. And the definition says simply that a system, well, this is not the definition by Maturana, the scientist who made this definition, but I made my own simplification because I don't want to talk about networks of processes. It's too technical. So I will say that a system is autopoietic when its operative processes, so whatever it does, provide the conditions both for its own or by its own operation, and both by its own operation and by its relation with the environment, for the execution of these operative processes. Sorry, I will say it again. So the very working of this system, both in how it works internally and in relation to its environment, end up allowing for the execution of such working. So that's what it's a sort of kind of seemingly circular definition, because what I do allows me to do what I do. So that's basically the concept. And this is how it is generally represented, the organism. And this circle you see here, it's just a metabolic pathway that is self-producing, and its relation to the environment allows it to couple with it so it can survive. So there is a couple between this system with its environment in a way that the inner working of the system remains invariant, or something close to invariant, self-maintaining. So we need efficient self-production of necessary molecules within the system, which can come from autocatalysis and metabolism, and are needed for homeostasis and control. So this is a more, let's say, detailed picture of an autopoietic system. So this is a bounded system which has some interaction with the environment, receiving some input and dropping out some output. We do that all the time. We eat and we go to the toilet. So we have this cycle going on, and we generate metabolic reaction network, which is what happens in our blood, in our cells, in our digestive system, and so on. And these molecular components end up determining who we are. And that's life in the end. For those who don't know about autopoiesis, it's really striking when you see it for the first time. It's just like recreation of yourself, and at some point in life, generating something like you. And how this happens, it's structurally speaking, but in this way. So, well, then we come up with ideas of evolution and complexity out of this. So these metabolic reaction networks can change, they can become more complex, they can learn to use some input, some different input. That's why some people eat meat and some people eat vegetables, or some animals tend to eat more meat and some others tend to eat more vegetables because their metabolic reaction network operates better with certain kind of food and the other harms them instead of feeding them. So we can, because of these changes, we can have a hierarchy, a hierarchical evolution, starting from very simple cells to more complex cells, having internal structures, and then we got organisms, and then these organisms create animals, and then animals create societies, and societies creates countries, and now we are at that stage pretty much. But we will supposed to be end up colonizing other parts of the space, and who knows what will happen after. Ask Isaac Asimov about it. He has a very beautiful theory about what are we gonna do later on in life, and like as a let's say cosmological scale of life. So there is an evolutionary and complexity point here too. Now, autopoiesis in nature, we see them, they are beautiful. This self-sustained pattern of motion in birds, flocks of birds, are being studied for a long time. And this is not the self-maintenance of the bird, but of the pattern of its movement. So there are self-creating patterns of motion that look like waves, interestingly, for birds, or the inner structure of cells and its fractal structure. All that is related to autopoiesis, and I won't dig much into that. But there is a sense of beauty in life, right? Autopoietic structures are connected to beauty. This is the Ouroboros snake, traditional, very, very old concept of the snake eating itself and thus, or a dragon, I don't know, eating itself and thus remaining alive forever. So you eat yourself and you remain alive. It's an old concept. And this has motivated multiple artists to experiment. There is something called autopoietic painting. I just learned this like not long ago. This is one of our colleagues, Felix Lasso, who's present here. He has also explored and expanded on the concept of autopoiesis for developing exhibitions. So he will tell us about that in his talk later on. I'm just introducing this. And what about music? We have this score. How do we input an autopoietic system in a score? Will it be beautiful? What do we have to do? So now that we have presented all this generative music, tonal music, the concept of music itself, the concept of networks, reactions, we go a little bit of talking about the concept of this talk, which is chemical organization theory. I will be very brief and I will not talk about the mathematics deep at all, almost. But we need to say we start from reaction networks. A reaction network is simply a list of molecules and a list of reactions, as we saw before, the breaking up, synthesizing, and combustion, and so on. And the interesting thing is that when you have a large reaction network, that like the one we saw before, the metabolic orchestra, as I was mentioning, of life, we can find parts of it, not just the entire whole, but parts of it that are autopoietic. And what does it mean, autopoietic, from a mathematical perspective? Operationally closed. That means that nothing new is created. So all the reactions tend to just use themselves or create themselves. You don't go further from that little area in the network. All what it is produced is consumed within this little area, and nothing goes out to the rest of the system. And self-maintaining means that whatever it's consumed is, and somehow that means by other reactions, produced by the same part. So we look at this part is operationally closed and also is capable of self-maintaining itself. Whatever reaction network that has these two properties, we will call it a chemical organization. And chemical organization theory is just a mathematical framework to put these two concepts together in order to take algorithms to make information processing with them, so we can take very large networks and understand what will be the autopoietic entities of this large network. Those will correspond to the forms of life within this reaction network we consider. There can be many. It can be like the live orchestra I mentioned before, or it can be others that we can create even artificially. And this is applied to understand how life could have emerged, or what is going to happen if a virus comes in a system, or if you take a certain drug, certain new molecule that might trigger new reactions, what is going to happen to the organism. So all that can be studied by using chemical organization theory. And there are lots of papers, and this is a research field on its own. So just show that the idea is we got this reaction network that can be listed as a set of reactions, and we find a hierarchy of organizations which are all the parts of the whole that have this autopoietic property. And these autopoietic systems, when you look at them as collections, they might have very interesting structures too. But that's more for the mathematical oriented people, that we can have algebraic substructures coming out, non-trivial algebraic structures coming out of this reaction universe. So it's a very interesting field from mathematical and computational perspectives. Not to mention more, there is this I could talk really for a long time, but that's not the aim of this talk. So now I go for the proposal. I'm coming to the end of the talk, so I just wanted to put all the pieces together. We know what music now is a little bit, music theory. We know what chemistry is. We know that what is this form of autopoiesis, the idea of connecting autopoiesis to beauty. And we see there is a striking similarity between how music theory denotes creative processes or rules, pseudo rules for creation, and how chemistry denotes complex processes. And we know that these complex processes end up being live forms, living systems. So we got this example of the major harmonic progression and also this reaction pathway. And they look pretty similar. Of course, this is a very basic conceptual thing to say they look similar so we can apply them. But they seem to have analogous structures. This I also will mention at the end a little bit more. But the point here is that if we understand, if we manage to make a clear analogy between musical and chemical entities, we can take all the generative power of chemistry and all the concepts of chemistry, like autopoiesis as a central one because of the beauty and because of its capacity to represent life, to generate music. So we will be able to say something like the beauty of life can be musically expressed, and we can use chemical organization theory as an interface language between chemistry and music. And please, someone discuss with me if this is not art science. I will say that this is a truly, I say this as a joke. I will say that this is a truly art scientific perspective. We are mixing up the beauty of life with the beauty of music, putting together musical entities and chemical entities, making an analogy with them and using mathematics as an interface language. This is, to me personally, I really love this idea and all what will happen next, because this is truly art scientific. It will lead to creation of new theories in COT, in reaction networks, and it will also lead to the creation of musical pieces if we manage to do the work, which is not easy. So now expanding a bit more in the analogy, the notable musical entities, so like musical entities, when we want to make information processing with sound so we can create music, we need to denote these musical entities, notes, and well, by a number of features, which are actually not small. The number of features that denotes music, it's extremely large, because you can play C, but you can play it loud, you can play it like different volume, you can have a C4 or C5, so there is a difference in the octaves. And also it can be played by the piano, by a trumpet, by a guitar, or by a clarinet, and the sound is different. And the clarinet can have whatever, well, these instruments can change, and you can synthesize the sound and change it in many, many ways. Musicians know this much better, of course, and we will talk about that in the future too, because Christian Gendraco has explored this stuff for this type of creations. So hopefully he will mention something of that in the future, in future talks. But I will pose a very basic and simple analogy. So between notes and a note will be something like an atom. Then the pitch will be the type of atom. So we have C atoms, D, G, etc. The octave can be translated to some form of energy. So different energy levels will be similar. So similar notes at similar energy levels, even though the types are different, and they tend to bond easily between around a certain energy. So that's why melodies don't go 3 octaves up and then 2 octaves down. Those changes are quite subtle. They don't happen so often as small changes where the energy is kind of kept constant. The duration of the note can be translated into something like decay time. I call it decay time just to make an analogy of something that happens and ends up happening. So it can also be reactive time. It can be some concept relating the time of molecules of chemical species. Decay, I use it because in chemical organization theory, we almost, no, I will say all molecules have decay reactions. But that doesn't mean that it vanishes. It means that it leaves the system. Molecules, because we are talking about the theory of open systems, which is some rather technical stuff, but things are, remember, there is input and output. So the duration of the node might be the time that it is between the input and the output of it. So that can be the duration. And the volume will be the concentration of each molecule, of course, or it's more kind of trivial. So we now have a pretty simple analogy, and we can continue saying the intervals, so 2 nodes played together, will be combining 2 atoms. And some combinations, because of energy, because of the chemical properties of them, might be repel them or might stick them together. So that will be an explanation of consonant and dissonant intervals. The chords will be complex molecules that can maintain together. If the chord is not a major chord, like it's not formed by consonant intervals. This is like more music theory. If it's not a major chord, if it's augmented or something that has dissonance, it will be a complex molecule that will tend to vanish very quick, unless there is a lot of energy, melodic energy coming in to keep it sustained. Chord transitions, as we saw in the previous slide, will be a reaction pathway. And there are some reaction pathways that naturally happen. So in the same way that chord transitions, some of them happen naturally as well. And there are some sort of rules of transitions, in the same way that reactions also have some rules. It's all energy dependent. This is very deep, but anyways, to finish the analogy, musical system then will be a reaction network. We say these are the things that can happen. So the musical system is composed by these possible transitions. This is the reaction network. And then we can find, given a musical system, autopoietic structures within it. So closed and self-maintaining dynamical processes, which will be creation of new molecules, compositions of molecules, decompositions, and so on, but in a self-maintaining and closed way. So this is pretty much the analogy. And to conclude, I want to say, remark that this is a first of a series of talks attempting to deepen this analogy. In further talks, other explorations will be shown, like, as I said, more relating to music, Vincenzo De Florio, or more relating to how to work with sounds and other expressive forms by Christian, and some other members of the group will also explain that. And we are also, I've been also doing some research on people that have explored similar ideas. This thesis is from like less than a year ago, composition methods related to chemistry and biology. And this guy did, he inspired himself by the process, by some particular processes like synapses or like some particular metabolic networks. And he did pretty like something very similar to what we are doing, but instead of doing it for generative music, because this is a composer, he took those patterns and he, by his mind, created compositions that evoke those patterns. So he did like a human, more where art science, where art is bigger than science. The other will be, science will be bigger than art if we do just generative. There is no human creative process much involved. We leave creativity to randomness when we do it with generative music. The Santa Fe people, probably you all know about it, the Santa Fe Institute of Complex Systems in Santa Fe, New Mexico. They have been for like 20, 30 years working on complexity, and they have done some relations between complexity theory and the structure of music. There is actually in mathematics something called mathematical music. And this person, this researcher, has integrated chemistry and music, but taking directly chemistry and translating into sound. So he takes reaction networks, but directly without any, he takes the sound of the molecules and sort of transpose the energy of them to audible energy, to waves that vibrate and we can hear them. And he makes just a simple translation, boom, and you can hear the sound of chemistry. That has been done for stars, for many other objects, that we can hear them, or we can see waves that we cannot see. It's just translating the energy spectrum. And this Maria Manone, who has done striking work on the mathematical structure of music. She's as well a composer. So when you start digging into this, you will end up knowing you are not the only one, and there might be very interesting people to bring here. So the hope is to create a little community that can expand these ideas, and hopefully from an art and scientific perspective. So I thank you again, Clea, and the Foundation, Interdisciplinary Foundation for Science, Technology, and the Arts in Chile for this. And I hope you have enjoyed. So here is the end of the talk. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thomas, would you stop the share of the screen so maybe we can have a little bit of Q&A? Cool, thank you. Anybody? Yeah.
Can I start, or how shall we do it? Shall we lift the hand, or I don't know.
You can just go ahead. So far, I see it's
okay. Thomas, thank you very much for this talk. I have a question, two questions actually. One, just to make it clear for me, when you talk about closed, that it is closed, which means that nothing new is produced. This does not mean, but it is an open system, right? It's just closed in its behavior. Is this right? But it's still open because it is in connection with the environment.
Yeah. Yes. I will make a distinction because it's a very good question. Can be confusing to say we are talking about open systems and all of a sudden you define what it's closed. It doesn't make any sense, right? But this have the subject of the definition for open and closed, it's different. So when we say open, what we mean is that there is a system and there is an outside of the system, and the system it's open in the sense that they interact. So the system does not only operate internally, it can also interact with its environment. And when we say closed, we consider that part of the system, but we might also consider a part of the environment of this system as in order to make the definition of closed. So you become closed, but because you are considering the system and a part of the environment as part of the whole process too. You see what I mean?
No, I didn't get. I didn't
No?
get it.
So let's say this. I have a person living in a place where there is an ocean and there is a river. So we have two species, one denoting the salt water of the ocean, and we have another species denoting the non-salty water of the river, right? So the person might live from the water of the river and also fishing from the river, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in this sense, we have a closed system. Let's say that the person never goes to the ocean to fish in the ocean or to take food from the ocean or anything like that. It just lives from the river. So then the autopoietic system will be the person, the river, and the fishes of the river. So the system, the person, is a closed system on its own. It's its own metabolic system, but it is related to part of its environment, in this case, the river and the fishes of the river. But we can also consider a larger set where the person does not only live out of the river and the fishes of the river, but also out of the salty water and also the fishes of the ocean. Maybe the salty water is used for whatever boiling, whatever, I don't know, for whatever process, like ancient process, and the algae or stuff that he can harvest from the ocean makes him happier, so it can eat more different types of food, right? So you get two autopoietic systems. One is the person living from the river and the fish, and the other is the person living from the river and the fish and the ocean.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Both are open because the person interacts with the environment, but the closure is different. One is only the river and the other is the river and the ocean.
Okay, great. I got it. Thank you. And my other question is, but that might be, we could talk about this more maybe when I present our workshop outcomes or our workshop explorations in 2 weeks. You are talking now, or you did talk about the analogy between musical and chemical entities as a concept. The way we approached trying to explore what we can do with COT within this winter semester, we did it differently. So we didn't look at chemical analogies, but we just used the notation system, you know, and we tried to explore what happens if we do it like that. That was more our approach, in the sense that when we were talking when you were in Düsseldorf, and what was written in one of your papers, that so the intriguing thing to us was that an atom or a species, or however you want to call it, or a molecule, could be anything, so that you can mix up things within one formula, you know, that it could be an idea and a device and so on. And this was the part where this was the path we were going.
Yeah. So when to continue this little thing, this proposal I made is following Francis' approach. He sent an email before at the beginning of all this, proposing that idea, and I kind of stand on his shoulders, you know, like following the Newtonian sentence to mention this. But of course, there is another, well, not of course, but actually good that you point out. I didn't mention this systemic view of reaction networks, just a little bit. There is a paradigm to represent systems in general, but I would like to know what are the entities, like devices or ideas, just for me to know what you say, the notation. You were saying that you were denote some things. So which things are those that you put together?
Yeah, what we tried. So it was actually the inspiration came from you when you said that when you try to model a process with COT, you have to come up with a narration. This was what you said.
Yes, narrative, yeah.
And so I had the idea that we try to model narrations and see what will be the outcome, you know. And so I took origin myths and we started to analyze origin myths because they are processes, you know, and
Yes.
this was the way we were going.
But that's not particularly music, is it? It's more
No,
semantics.
no. Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
Exactly, but it was but the idea was to try it out on this level and then see where it can take us, you know. And
yeah,
so
absolutely, yeah.
And so I thought it might be interesting to show this in 2 weeks to
I
our
think
community.
it is. It's just that I wanted to be very explicit about music, because of course the narrative, it's something that has been much deeper or profoundly explored. We have done models of decision making, of social systems, of different things, but I wanted to kind of target it more to music this time, just to show that particular analogy. But of course it's very nice that you mentioned, because the audience might want to know also that this language of reaction networks is as I said, is a language to represent systems whose dynamics, fundamental dynamics, is described by transformative interactions. So I am this, I got together with you, and we become something novel somehow. And that's all. Whatever you can represent this way can be ecological systems, which I have explored in the past. Like ecological interactions can be described like that. When you eat something, when an animal eats something, that something, there is an interaction. This plus that gives this alive, and the other has food. So, and you can explain ecological systems as reaction networks too, and narrations in general. Well, yeah, it's a very open language. So yeah,
okay, good. So
let's leave someone, maybe some other question.
Okay, thank you.
It's around, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to give a little bit more context about what my original idea was. So Thomas spoke a little bit about this Templeton project. So we got a lot of money to study this so-called origin of goal-directedness. And we are using this new language of chemical organization theory or reaction networks to try to understand that. The general idea being that the origin of life is usually seen as some kind of a network of chemical reactions that stabilizes and becomes autopoietic. But the problem is, it's very difficult to visualize these kind of self-producing networks because they are horribly complicated. But what they have, by definition of being autopoietic, is that they have a kind of a cyclical structure. That means that things appear, things disappear, things get consumed, things get produced, but in the end, whatever gets consumed gets produced again. So there is a kind of a repetition in it. And then my thought was, our ears are very well tuned in recognizing patterns in sound where there are repetitions. So maybe if we translate these abstract models into sounds, it will become much easier to grasp how these repetitive autopoietic structures are formed than if we have to draw them. I mean, if you would draw it, you would get some kind of a spaghetti. I mean, the only examples you see of drawings of chemical reactions, they're typically very simple reactions with like 6, 7 molecules, while if you want to model the origin of life, obviously you will need to have hundreds of them. And then drawing them, visualizing them, it's not possible. But if you can make them into sounds, then maybe it will produce something that we would recognize somehow as music, meaning that there is some kind of a cyclical periodic pattern in it. So that was part of the motivation.
And maybe just in that direction also, indeed, the umbrella is about goal-orientedness. Thomas, how do you see, for instance, chemistry, music? Is there some kind of goal-orientedness, or do you see it in the autopoietic part, like Francis explained, or is there a goal-orientedness? That's my question.
Thank you. Yeah. I feel, or what I think about it is that the music, or what I'm not an expert in music, as I said before, but I know a little bit about tonal music, and there is something in music that sort of it's revealed by the piece. So there is something that is revealed by the piece, and there is a sort of cycle. So in tonal, as I said, tonal music goes, elaborates, and then goes back to the origin. Sometimes it doesn't start in the origin; it starts in somewhere else. But you can feel that there is something which is that I don't know the in English.
Thomas, you are disappearing. We can't hear you anymore.
Yes, the line is bad.
Thomas, maybe you should try explain it again later, because now we don't understand you.
It was becoming music.
Well, Thomas is calling in from Chile, and in previous Zoom meetings, we always have some period where he has to change his connection or something like that because it goes wrong.
I'm probably
That's
back.
better.
Yes.
Am I?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was a low battery problem. I just had it unplugged. Like as I said, everything that can go wrong first time, it always goes wrong. So, well, yeah, okay. So I was saying that the purpose of music, the goal-orientedness of music, I think that in tonal music, at least, one can say that the tone or the chord in which the piece is written. So if the piece is written in C major, you feel that all the music, all the reaction pathway, let's say, is about to maintain that structure, and it gets revealed. So the interpretation in this case is that the goal to be the goal of the piece is to somehow in a complex way, not in a trivial way, in a complex way, arrive to this tonal, let's say, center, which is like revealing the piece or showing some complex form that ends up making autopoietic the piece because it comes and closes itself. It's an open interpretation, but it is also interesting that there is this non-tonal music, the modal music, I think it's called, that changes, like Debussy or other composers that are more modern, that is not so easily tonal music, and it's always changing. It's kind of like never arriving to this center. But in that case, the purpose, it's analogous to, instead of reaching something, it's about moving around. So the purpose, it's analogous to what it will be in chemistry to a periodic orbit. So tonal music sort of converges or arrives to this goal, which is the fixed point, the tonal center. It moves around, it goes, but there is a tonal fixed point. Whereas in this other more complex music, instead of having a fixed point where you're going to, your objective, your goal is to move around a certain trajectory, which respects some rules. Those rules are the transitions for the correct modal changes. So the reaction networks are different in each case. Or might be the same reaction network, the very big reaction network, but there will be two autopoietic systems of different nature happening for the same maybe tonal rules. It's just that one is more like a fixed point and the other is more like a periodic orbit. I'm not sure if you are familiar with those concepts. So maybe we can discuss it further. But it's basically like a point or a circle. So the tonal center is a point, and the music kind of goes around and ends up showing you the way to get there. Whereas the other moves around showing you that there is no point to go, but the trajectory to follow. So that will be a sort of basic answer to that. I have no mathematical formalization beyond what I'm saying.
No, I understand, but maybe it's not goal-orientedness. Maybe it's just the effect that it has upon us. But of course, you could wonder philosophically, maybe there is no goal. What we call goal-orientedness are effects that it has on the human brain, etc. I don't know.
Well, I think
No.
you. I'm
Sorry.
sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think you were talking about the tonal system, that you mean all the chords in that system have a function, a certain function. We have the tonica, the subdominant, and the dominant functions. And this dominant chord at the fifth degree wants always go back to the first chord, the tonica. And I think that is what you mean by goal-orientedness. And in atonal music, where you don't have a center, this C major chord, for instance, you're moving around. Yes, it means that you use the 12 tones, and then you go back. That's another system. But you have also, for example, improvised music, where you don't know what's going to happen, and there everything is there's no center, and you're not moving around either. So I think that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, those that's an interesting expansion on it, because that improvisation still, once it's played back, you will maybe those that were playing at least might find that the transitions, what was happening was not random noise. There was a connection. There was something maybe not as trivial as a tone or as a transition like in a tonal that you were explaining, but there is something that is somehow seek for, and that could be or can be analogous to what the strange attractor does in dynamical systems. So the strange attractor is whatever remains outside these rules, but still it's invariant in it. Yeah, I'm sort of plenty of bubbles, you know, of potential things that can be or cannot be. And yeah, so thank you, Anne, for your comment.
Tomas, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, I have a question. It's related that you talk about before, but I trying to imagine what you think, and I think that a system is like a melody, right? If you think that there are different melodies in a big picture, in an organization, in a maybe, I don't know, in a composition, how do you think that these melodies can interact with each other? Do you think that there are two levels difference? There are two different levels or different systems that, I don't know if you have think about that. If there are some rules that can connect one melody to another melody. I don't know. Maybe I am confused.
I think I follow what you say. Not sure exactly, but yeah, we can because when we start doing this formalization, we will have to do like decisions like this. Like, let's assume that only one, like no spatial patterns are formed. So that means we only have simple transformations. So we get molecule, we start from a molecule, it changes to another molecule because we have a rule for it. It lasts for some time and then another rule is applied. And then if that molecule is a note, it will sound for some time until the next reaction is triggered, and we will have a melody. So then we can start from 2 notes and we will have like 2 melodies, but of course the transitions will have to be such that these 2 melodies will be, the rules allow you, so the rules should be such that these 2 melodies will create something which is a musical pattern. So not just random changes. So there should be preference for some for certain reactions under certain conditions to happen more than others. We could, for example, calibrate that using catalysts as subproducts. So whenever this molecule changes into that, then this catalyst switches to another form, which will help to catalyze some other reactions. So in this way, you can create melodies that follow not too dissonant intervals so frequent. So the harmonic or the consonant intervals will happen more often than the dissonant intervals, but you still have to allow for some dissonant intervals to happen from time to time. So the melody is not always like trivial. And that will be maybe I'm not sure if I follow what you say, but that will be an implementation of the possibility you were mentioning. If I follow probably maybe what you say.
You
yes?
You should start with the fugues of Bach to see what that gives.
Yeah.
There you have 3 melodies. In fact, what Bach intuitively was using was a deep insight in the harmonic structure.
Yeah, I saw. Sorry,
but I think you agree. I agree with you, Thomas. If you start with C major, for example, even if you go to popular music, Beatle music, or whatever, you see that some chords hang around it always. For example, C major, you will have E minor, who is close to that. We have A minor, who is close to it. You will have F, of course, with the blues, and G with the blues. So there's always a collection of chords that hang together, that are used in some way. That is what you mentioned, I think. No, that is what your intuition was.
The progressions are kind of like pathways. And now the melodies can also be created, as you were mentioning before. Sorry, Felix, 1 sec. When I was studying for this lecture, for this seminar, I found that the Santa Fe guys have studied the pattern-like structure of Bach music, and they discovered that it's actually linear algebra. You take the patterns and then you flip it, then you stretch it and flip it. It's like what's the name of this? It's like linear algebra geometry. They just Bach just stretched it, flipped it, rotated, did all these operations to musical patterns, and then you can feel and say, okay, these 4 bars, he was doing this, then he took this and flipped it this way, then 8 bars after, he repeated that, but then he flipped it the other way around and put another voice doing the same pattern that is over there, but here, and flip it back. So maybe he had an algorithm. I think. Well, actually, AI has discovered some structures by hearing Bach music. So
that is the reason of the well-tempered clavier when Bach started. The well-tempering was to make it mathematically fit.
Yeah.
Because,
it would be nice to know that story taught by you or by someone.
because the Pythagorean system doesn't fit really. But you have to take 12 square roots to make it really fit.
Sorry, can I make some observations?
Yeah.
Okay, from my point of view,
Felix.
Yes, we are trying to. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. You're trying to make a sandwich of natural reactions that are completely natural with a cultural achieved system that is music. Okay. So also we're talking about Western music, because we're not talking about Bali music. We're not talking about African music. We're talking about European Western music from 1500 to 1900. You know, the tonal system. So we are trying to make something that really doesn't fit from my point of view. We have to challenge that. We have to make some very scientific and intellectual approach to what is happening with this natural phenomena that's happening with the COT, and what can be achieved with that. Like in a very light sense. I think the mapping, it's where the narratives, as Kristen said, goes deeply into it. We have to analyze what are the assumptions we're putting into the mapping that we are going to translate this natural phenomena into a cultural phenomena. So the mapping is, from my point of view, one of the most important things to talk about, is why we're doing this. It's not because it seems like more or less close to each other, but it has to be like a deeper level of thought into that. I'm sorry, but that's the way I see it.
Yeah, I will make a.
I'm sorry.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I send a reply a little? Felix, I cannot be more in agreement with you. For this talk, I use the tonal system and Western music for obvious reasons. Like it's easier to explain. The musical notation, it's at least easier to understand for everyone. We all know a little bit of that notation. It's the music we are familiar with, but the language and the challenge is not reduced only to Western music. It's just that you need to find the right notation to express the music of other cultures. And that doesn't change the fact that the patterns of such music will still be represented by a certain mapping. And as you say, the mapping is the interesting part, but we need to start from somewhere. So I believe that the easiest place to start from is Western music, where there is all this notation, there is a lot of work of how to express music and so on. In other cultures, music is an oral tradition, so it's kind of harder to harness. But actually, as you say, it's very interesting to know if the mappings are different. And I believe, and it can be like a very speculative thought, is that the structural beauty, which is the autopoietic nature of it, you will still find it. Even though you have different mappings, the structure of music, of what remains as music, even in whatever oral tradition or royal tradition for the kings and so on in the Western music, I believe that there is a high chance, in my opinion, to find structural similarities at that level. So that will be the something to prove, but there's a lot of work to get there. Sorry, that was my reply. Katarina?
I'm just thinking about the assumptions that exist already, and the assumption of mapping a closed system onto a musical composition or a sound piece. And like my first question here is, what do you understand as an environment if we take that the world is sounding all the time? You don't have silence, or you need to equally map this environment as much as you map the system in order to analyze them both. And how do you map the entire world that is sounding at all times? Or how, on the other hand, how do you know who hears which frequencies or who has which environment?
The idea is to, I think the point is not to discover that aspect, but to make an assumption of how it will be. So you say, if I assume this environment and I assume these rules, this is what I get. I think the question to seek for the structure of nature out of this research project, like reversing, like what you are mentioning, it's kind of reversing the question. It's like, are we able to understand the inner structure of nature by doing these mappings? I think it's a very ambitious question, and I'm not sure if it will give a positive answer. But on the other, but the other way around, taking this as a language and use it to create something, of course, avoiding all the complexities of nature. That's what science not normally is about, of grasping what it is relevant to explain particular phenomenon. So instead of like confronting with the entire complexity of the universe, because that challenge is too tough. You always lose when you try to, unless you find nirvana, right? If you find nirvana, you win, but otherwise you normally won't get very far. And then the approach I think I'm proposing is the other way around to what you say. But still, it's quite deep to think in this way. To if I think if we manage to actually, I believe that if we manage to make the mappings that Felix was saying before for different cultures, and we manage to find some invariant structures across cultures, we might be listening to the music of the gods there, right? It will be something like really deep and fundamental about nature that we end up discovering through this process. But that will be something, it's too speculative for me to say it will be this way. We might not get there. So yeah, I prefer to think through the other approach. Yeah.
But Thomas, the harmony of Pythagoras is not cultural depending, you know. It will be found back in every culture, because it's very simple. I don't know if you know the story, but Pythagoras came to it by hearing a smithy hit on iron bars. And in fact, if you take iron bars and you hit them with a hammer, then the half of a bar will be one octave higher, the sound. And a fourth of a bar will be 2 octaves higher. So it's a very simple physical thing beneath that is not depending on any culture. If you hit a string on a guitar, you get the octave higher by taking half of the string, exactly half. And
but the point is that in other cultures, they don't render as too important the intervals that we render as important, like the octave or the fifth. In other cultures, they have microtonal systems, and they don't even care about the separation of the string. I mean, I'm saying this in a very bold way. I'm disrespectful even to the other cultures. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, just to say that for them it's not, they don't attribute the same importance that we attribute to certain differences or qualia of music. Western music has some qualia that it starts from, it's based on physics, but other cultures don't pay attention to that qualia.
But
so that's maybe relevant.
The difference comes much later, I think. Western music has structured all this system in a very, very Western way, and that's different in other cultures. But the basic of harmony is the same. It's not cultural dependent.
Yes. And actually, that's why I believe we can do different mappings for different cultures. where some qualia will end up becoming represented by reactions that have a higher likelihood to happen for certain cultures than for others.
Yeah, definitely.
So the mapping changes, but as you say, the structure, the fundamental elements we can assume they are the same. It's just music, sound. So
Thomas, for example, if you have there's quite some research in musicology. When you study different tonal systems in other cultures, they see actually that somehow this can be reduced to the instruments they are using, and maybe the wood they are using, or maybe like if you have the gamelan instruments, how tonally, if you study the acoustics of the signal, it still remains so that their tonal system is somehow a mathematical approximation of how their instruments are. The timbre, if you would say so, of the instruments sound. So I think there are some kind of universal principles which are interesting. And something I was wondering concerning the chemical organization theory, would it be open, as it is a mathematical formalism, would it be open to studying the wave-like structure of the sound waves of music? Like, for example, if you have like some sounds which are waves traveling through space, interfering with other waves, diffracting, reflecting on walls, and is it possible to study those kind of interactions with the chemical organization theory?
I believe it is possible. It will depend on, as I said before, as long as the interactions can be considered to be transformative processes, that you start some entities, get together and create some other entities, then that can be done. And I think that all what you were saying, the wave phenomenon, about the waves, were along that line. Like, but I'm not sure if you are I mean, if one is really bothered or concerned with the spatial structure under which the waves are traveling, right? If you are concerned with that, with the reflections and with the reverberation of the place and so on, if that is the focus, I will personally, at this moment, thinking maybe I might change my mind later, but I personally go to wave modeling directly. No, wouldn't go to molecules, because waves can be represented in space, and there are like wave objects. So
I think something really special would be that as we are able, maybe like Francis said, we are able to hear things that we cannot see, and we can hear like the cyclical or the temporal structure of sound waves or music in such a small and just like a really fast and small level, that's something really special. And even things like interference or maybe emergent phenomena, we are able to hear those things. And it would be visually, it would be impossible to track.
I see
this level of intensity. And I think it's something interesting if we would be able to study that somehow mathematically. I don't know.
In the way you explain it, it could be. I mean, I think it's possible to represent that, but I'm a little concerned is that with this language, as it has been so far explained, just as this level, we haven't incorporated much the modeling of space itself. What is the border? All the molecules at this point are just in a simple reactor, in a simple vessel, and all have pretty much the same probability to interact. So when you want to impose spatial structures, like there is a little tunnel and the molecules can go up from this way to reach to this other reactor and then can react this way, and it's imposing like a spatial structure to the molecules as well. Then it's when you get to the real like biochemistry, and that maybe will also be the domain that you are explaining. But
Stan,
sorry.
I wonder whether Stan means that it's really the acoustic or rather the more fundamental wave structure. I think if you go to Pythagoras again, then it's the fundamental wave structure, not so much the acoustics of the room or of a specific instrument. Of course, it's true with real instruments, acoustics is very complicated always. So they have to, the playing a real instrument is making it more simple actually, yeah? Trying to make it more simple. Well, I don't know what Stan means. Do you mean
I mean the fundamental, the mathematical structure, as you would say, of different waves interacting with.
But I think Thomas understood that you would really like to have the waves in space. That's much more complicated. How the acoustic really works. Yeah, that's very.
So what is the qualia one wants to model?
I think you should not go to the acoustics really, but rather to the fundamental structure, the frequency, the very, very simple things that you can attribute to sine and cosine waves even. And then you have the double frequency will be an octave higher. The triple C frequency is a quint higher, and that's on and so on. There's certainly a lot of structure in music, and there's no doubt about that. A lot of mathematical structure. The problem will probably be, I would like to hear, if you take some simple chemical, it would be interesting to make a simple test. You take some simple chemical, well-known transformations, and you attach some music to it. How does it sound?
Yeah, that's what Francis proposed in the first place. And we hope to do that. Like actually someone from Christian's group, I think, was possibly able to do that in sometime in the future.
My guess,
kind of following that.
My intuitive guess would be that it's not so easy to capture the harmonic, the harmonic structure. It's kind of.
I think catalysts could help a lot.
I think it's quite non-local, you see. Non-local in the sense, you said at a certain moment in your talk that notes don't move far away from each other in melodies. That's certainly true. But harmonies move very, very far away from each other. The C major is, for example, very harmonic with the A minor, while the C and the A are very far away, And it's because of chords being with 3 notes usually. Some chords have 4 notes, but mostly 3 notes. And so it's really on the level of the chords, you have another mathematics actually than on the level of the notes.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is one possible approach to look at it this way on the, let's say, on the fundamental setup of sound waves and things like that, and harmony and a Pythagorean approach. Another idea or another approach that I'm thinking about is more in the way that you think, or that I think more in the way of a performance, which produces sound. But it's not important if it is C major or if it has a blues structure or anything else. It's more about that you have a set of rules, that you have a performance system, and this system then performs like an autopoietic system or as a autopoietic system. But then the problem is not so much, or the center of the center is not so much on the structural similarities, between chemical structures and sound structures. So this would be another possible way to make the autopoietic system audible. But I think these are 2 approaches. two approaches,
yeah,
two ways that I think are possible to go.
There have been some musicians, Xenakis, for example, is one of them, who has been exploring a lot of certain mathematical structures, put them into music, but it leads usually to not very harmonic music indeed.
Yes, exactly, because it's about performance, not about actual sound.
Yeah, but I think what Thomas,
sorry, because it's a bit what Katharina said in our last session. Katharina, what was it? The great Merleau-Ponty quote?
Phenomenology of sound, of listening. That the listening always goes to the origin of the sound.
Yes, exactly. So this is I see this as a possible approach, so that our listening goes to the source of the sound, and this is Diederik. This is one of the approaches of Yannis Xenakis, I would say, is that you can tell by listening to it what the algorithm is the people are performing.
Yeah.
And this is a different approach, but a very interesting
different.
approach.
Yeah. This is different. But okay, I think what Thomas was bringing up in his talk is also very interesting. Yeah? If there would be, I doubt it also, but it's because of the things like Xenakis have been trying out and so on, and it's very little harmony that you feel. But it could be, who knows, that if you make these chemical reactions, that there is some some connection also. That would be great. It would be the old idea of the music of the spheres.
Yes, it goes back to it. Yeah, I forgot to put that figure and speak about it because.
But I also doubt it because of this example of composers like Xenakis have been trying. You see, usually it leads to very, very, very atonal music. I didn't know about what you mentioned, that in the Santa Fe they analyzed Bach musics. Do you have references for that?
I do. I'll send it to you, or send it to everyone in the group so it can be shared with the rest of the
I didn't know about
the
that.
audience as
to
well.
See what they found.
Yeah, Chris Moore.
Interesting.
Yeah, there is a very nice lecture where they show these patterns and they analyze the with an orchestra. So they play it. They say this melody, it sounds like this, and then this other instrument plays it but reversed, and then let's put it together, boom, and the orchestra plays. It's fantastic. The lecture.
And this gave rise to linear algebra, you say?
My understanding of it was that all were linear algebraic operations, like rotations and stretching, compressing, and so all you can do with matrices. That was my understanding. I don't really.
It's fascinating.
Studied it in depth.
What also would be interesting, I don't know, I never looked at it, I never found the time, also intrigues me, is to see a little bit what the group of Dalla Chiara did with music.
Yeah, we should invite them to
should
give a talk.
invite.
Actually, that's the point of these seminars, to start like inviting other people around.
I think she will be glad to talk about that.
Yep.
They try to do. I don't exactly know what they're doing, honestly speaking, but they try to find quantum structures in music, I think, no?
Yeah, because when the basic point is that when you have an interval, and the interval might belong to different scales, right? So if a melody plays two notes, then you immediately recognize a superposition of scales. You see? So the music reveals as a collapse of local structures in time. So now we have this is the chord. So the melody is revealing something, and then you get another note. So now the collapse of the wave function, the quantum representation of the semantics of music, it's sort of motion in planes in a Hilbert space. So your vector kind of is being projected from one place to the other. And music, it's the game of projecting through different subspaces of the Hilbert space. That's in very short words and probably not understandable by most of the audience. But she will explain it more in depth. Mm-hmm.
As we're now coming to 2 full hours of the conversation.
Yeah.
If nobody has anything urgent to add now, I propose we continue this in 2 weeks with Christian's lecture or presentation.
I agree.
Yeah, we should think about these interesting topics with afresh, I guess. Now I'm also.
Yep.
It's getting harder to follow.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. There was a huge audience coming in, so it was a beautiful start. I hope this continues, and if we all put the necessary effort into it.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Thomas, for this very interesting talk.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Hi,
thank
Marcus.
you everyone for being here. And if you like you can find the recording of this session on YouTube channel. If you like, I can send a link here again, so you can have it as a reference.
Great.
Just a second. And I'm not sure how the communication channels are going, but it would be great if we have a good communication channel to share all the references and links and everything. So at the moment, I'm not sure how that works, but is there?
Figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. So by the next meeting, everything should be in place.
Okay, so stay tuned for 2 weeks. Christian's Gendraco talk. Yeah.
Great.
Bye
yeah,
bye.
Everyone stay safe. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you very much.
Good
Bye-bye.
weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.